Good evening, everyone. Thank you.
Hello.
Commissioner Bonsignore, welcome. Delighted and honored to have you here. Understand you have to leave a bit early, so we decided that you and I would be in conversation for a few minutes. And those are some hard acts to follow. We have our work cut out for us.
I see. Thank you for having me. And thank you
Yeah.
for being flexible enough.
Sure. Indeed. I want to begin December 2025, just 3 months ago, the then mayor-elect Zoran Mamdani announced that you would become the next fire department commissioner of New York City. It was a milestone. You would become the second woman to hold the position, the first uniformed woman, the first openly lesbian. You received the support of the 3 fire department unions. Very impressive. What was your reaction?
I don't think anybody saw that one coming. It was a moment of humility and responsibility. It was a moment I felt I had worked toward my entire life. And it was an amazing moment. I wasn't sure which one of those moments were going to be the hardest for people to accept, whether I was a woman, whether I was gay, or whether I was EMS. It turned out EMS was the bigger problem. Yes. But it really was just a magical moment for me to come home, and I felt like my entire career had prepared me for this particular moment in time where I can lead the world's greatest fire department and still be all 3 of those things I just said. And I think that happens because of people who just refuse to be hidden in our past. They paved the way for me, and I hope to pave the way for others.
Thank you. Not surprisingly, your appointment ignited a firestorm online. Elon Musk of X posted, quote, "People will die." How would you respond to Musk and other critics?
I would say, thankfully, I'm a paramedic. Yeah. You know, there's always going to be people that want to be part of the conversation, and I respect that. I think that's an important part of us moving forward, is taking on these difficult concepts and difficult conversations. I will say that we're in the business of saving lives. I did 31 years with the fire department and loved every second that I was there in that uniform. And I retired for 3 years. So I had made it all the way through and retired for 3 years prior to being invited back as commissioner. And we save lives for a living. And that requires a high standard of excellence, bravery, and skill. So for the internet to blow up over my appointment, I say have at it. And I focused my energy on the 17,000 amazing people who show up at the fire department every day to save the lives of New Yorkers. That was my only concern. And no matter what they said, it didn't change the fact that I was indeed the fire commissioner. So they could say whatever they want.
It's like a badge of honor to be criticized by Elon Musk.
I heard that's how you know you made it. Yeah.
Commissioner, Fire Flag EMS is an organization supporting LGBTQ firefighters, paramedics, and EMTs. It was founded in 1992 by the openly gay firefighter Gene Walsh and others. How has Fire Flag EMS expanded in recent years, and what kind of services does the organization provide?
They're a wonderful organization. I think they were started by a group of closeted firefighters who didn't feel they had a place in the fire department. They didn't feel safe. They were afraid they may lose their job or even be physically hurt if they came out. And they found comfort in each other and developed this particular organization, which later changed their name to Fire Flag EMS to include EMS. Originally, it was just fire. And I think we have come a long way over the years. And we've come from a place where this particular organization is there to protect and support the few who are part of the LGBTQI plus community. And now they're a place where they flourish within our department. And they are so very inclusive, and they do things like education and advocacy and mentoring, and they engage in social engagements and all types of really great things that are not hidden in the stigma of this being something scary or negative. And I applaud them, because it's not an easy thing to be the first at anything, but it's so required, and they have changed the landscape of the fire department. And I think, you know, I contacted them even coming here to say, tell me, you know, tell me what's important, tell me about your history, tell me what I don't know. And they're always happy to be part of that conversation. We rely on them very heavily to just engage in inclusivity across the fire department. And I'll continue to support that organization and watch them grow even more.
Thank you. Commissioner, we're here tonight in part to understand the evolution of institutions that had opposed gay rights, in particular in the 70s and 80s during the struggle to pass the gay rights bill. And I wonder about some of the trailblazers in the fire department since the 1970s. I'll mention a few names. You don't have to comment on all of them. But we know that the FDNY was historically characterized as a brotherhood, insular, resistant to change. Would you perhaps reflect about some of the trailblazers? I'm thinking, for instance, Brenda Berkman, who is here tonight. Brenda, in 1979, filed a class action suit against the department charging discrimination in the physical exam. And in 1982, a federal court ruled in her favor, and she was admitted along with others to the fire department. There was continuous harassment, there was litigation, but ultimately she prevailed. It was not easy by any stretch. We spoke last night. Or there was Tom Ryan, who was the first openly gay firefighter to march in the city's Pride Parade in blue dress uniform in 1999 alongside Commissioner Tom Von Essen. Father Michael Judge, a beloved Franciscan friar and FDN chaplain, ministered to people with AIDS in New York City, was the first certified fatality in 9/11. After his death, a few people commented that he was gay, including Commissioner Von Essen. Then there is Brooke Guinan, who came out as the first openly transgender firefighter in 2011, Reverend Ann Cansfield, the first female and the first openly gay chaplain in the department, sworn in 2015. So I gave you more than a few names. I'm just wondering if you can maybe reflect about some of these individuals, their struggles, their work, to pave the way, as you were saying.
I think we owe a ton of appreciation to Brenda. I would not be sitting here today if it wasn't for Brenda. It is, there's these magical moments in our world, right, where one person decides to be the change that the world needs, and they're willing to take all the drama that comes along with it. And that's not an easy decision, because you really put yourself out there. And in situations like coming into the fire department and fighting for women to be part of the fire department, that took a lot of guts, and it took a lot of bravery to stand up against such an institution to say it's time that we be different. And because she did that, it allowed for other people to come behind her. It allowed for Tom, it allowed for Brooke, it allowed for Ann, and it allowed for me. You know, and I think this has been many, many years of a marathon. And, you know, as one is finishing, the other one's coming right behind them. You know, we're passing the baton to each other, and we're making it bigger and better than it ever was. And every single one of these people who have come and been the first and have said, now it's my turn, to pave the path for everybody else because it's the right thing to do, has put themselves in danger, has risked losing friends and family, have, dealt with internets of people who want to have a say. And it's only because of those people that we become better. So, I've known many of the names that you have mentioned, thankfully, and I thank each and every one of them for allowing me to be gay, a woman, and EMS, and sit as the fire commissioner of the greatest fire department in the world. This would never have happened without any of these people. Yeah.
You've been quoted as saying that regarding your status as a trailblazer, you have remarked that being gay and being a woman are the two things that I put the least work into. Would you explain?
That is true. So, I worked for the fire department for, I said, 31 years. Fire Flag EMS had their first event where I got an award. I think I was their highest ranking out LGBT person in the fire department. And I got an award for that. And I thought, well, with all the things I've done for this fire department, I've got an award for doing the things that I've never put any thought into, like one being a woman and the other being a lesbian. I put the least amount of work into both of those things, yet I got an award for it. So thank you, But I did, in all honesty, the way I see me in this whole picture, and even on that day where I got the award for, I would have loved to get an award for actually changing the structure of EMS, but maybe some other time. The way I see it is I was marching in a pride parade, and I was the chief. And I looked behind me, and there was a young probie, an EMS probie. And she was waving at me, like, very excitedly. And she was like, "Oh, Chief Bonsignore, like, you're my hero. Like, look at you, look." And I said, come up here, and march with me. And I realized at that moment that anything I did in this career was not about me. It was about the possibility that somebody else sees. When she looked at me, she knew there was a pathway for her to be the chief, to be the person in the front of the parade. She saw me as her future. And I took that very, very seriously, which is why I'm never hiding who I am. I'm happy to be the example and hope to be a great example for those coming behind me.
Thank you, Commissioner. I'm mindful of time. Just one last question. What are your thoughts on serving as Grand Marshal for this year's Queen's Pride Parade?
Well, I'm very happy about it because we'll be able to march in that parade with our brothers and sisters from Goal. So I'm very, very excited about it. I honestly never been a Grand Marshal before, so I didn't know what it meant. I didn't know if I had to bring something, but I'm super excited to support. I'm getting ready to wear the sash that they're going to give me, and I got my wave down perfectly, so I'm ready to go. We're excited.
Thank you. This is a perfect place to conclude our conversation. I want to thank you so much. Your leadership is inspiring, impressive for more than 30 years. Thank you, Commissioner.
Thank you very much. Thank you for having me.
Now, I would like to call the other three panelists, Ryan, Marianne, Sal. Thank you again, Commissioner Bonsignore. Welcome, everyone. I'll start with Ryan. Ryan, November 2024, you were appointed Chief of Staff to the Commissioner of the New York Police Department, Jessica Tisch. Would you describe your reaction?
I remember when she told me she was doing this. It didn't hit because I was her chief of staff at sanitation and do it, and basically for years, many of them know, for years inside the Information Technology Bureau. But I grew up as a civilian in the New York City Police Department, and that was where I had my first job. That was, NYPD is how I came out. And it struck me as it wasn't real and it wasn't going to happen. And then she had me walk the stage and gave me a shield. And I remember being numb and overwhelmed, and coming off the stage going, this is going to be a huge responsibility, and seeing the then president of Goal. I grabbed him and I said, okay, we have about 15 unfinished things here in my office tomorrow. We're going to work on them. And it was like a light bulb went off. She'd given me a position of trust. She wanted to make sure that folks knew I was both out and her chief of staff. And she was ready to also help the community take a few more steps inside the police department that we did over the past few years. And I can't actually separate those two things, meaning being me and out and being appointed chief of staff. They were, for her, meaningfully entwined, for me, meaningfully entwined. And then at some point, the work was so overwhelming on that very first day that I forgot to be overwhelmed, and I just got into it. But it was unbelievable, and I still, to this day, look back, and I can't believe I'm sitting here in that role.
You're a longtime member of GOAL, Ryan, the Gay Officers Action League, established in 1982 by Sergeant Charlie Cochran and others. You became director of GOAL in 2017. What were your priorities and responsibilities as GOAL director?
Okay. For anyone here who's dealt with GOAL, in the late 2010s to early 2020s, you know everyone on the board had one responsibility: keep our president focused. It was an unbelievable time where we had, I think, one of the most dynamic boards that I've ever seen working for any fraternal organization in the New York City Police Department, fighting to get changes into the patrol and admin guide, out at council hearings talking about medical needs for the community, standing at courthouses in other states and other cities talking about how it is unfair that out members of law enforcement were essentially getting implicitly persecuted and protesting until they were given their jobs back. It was incredible. And my job, the whole board's job, was keep the person who was doing that and giving us these opportunities focused on it and then amplifying it. And I say all that because I see a number of the board members in the audience, and every one of us sweat and bled every night to do something, to find a way to get it in front of the council, that there are New York City employees that do not have access to medical coverage for antiretrovirals or for basic things now that are seemingly commonplace, like PrEP. It was that group who was trying to make sure that GOAL and the NYPD actually had outside advisory boards and donors to help us activate further and amplify our voices. And Fran, I thought I saw you here earlier. Okay, Fran, it was literally this group that said, thank you so much for the settlement. Now we have to get the NYPD to put this in writing in a way the city and the PD had never done before, and fighting to do that through the pandemic, through after, and everything. That was what it was like being the executive director, and I will tell you that that work never left me, and it's been an unbelievable ride now to see so much that we had on the precipice actually come up, be enshrined in the police department. Like last year, thanks to their efforts, everything that Fran, Edgar, and the crew fought for in the 90s is now in a memorandum of understanding with the police commissioner. And there is no more settlement. There is now the police department saying we're doing these things, and we're actively saying we're doing these things. We are not going to give up an LGBTQ rep in the police commissioner's office. We're not going to give up the training workshop. We are not going to not have our officers march in pride, though now there's a separate issue outside that they're dealing with. And I think that all of that work as executive director getting realized now. I realize there's so much more that we have to do. And that board sitting in that row where the Mets shirt, jersey is, thank you, honey, for still wearing that, knows it and is fighting for it.
The Mets won today.
Amen. 11-7. As Danny said, thank God. Yeah. Oh.
Marianne, the organization Dignity was founded in 1969, a national organization primarily to provide support and sanctuary for gay Catholics. Chapters opened up in cities nationwide. The New York chapter opened up in 1972. You attended your first Dignity Mass in 1982, took a leadership role in 85. A real turning point for you was in 1993 when you were elected president of Dignity. You served until 97. Would you talk about some of your initiatives to help reshape Dignity in the mid-1990s as president?
First, thank you for the work you're doing here and for including us as part of this tonight. It's really important to mark anniversaries like this and to use them to fuel the work that still has to be done. So I'm really proud to be part of that. In the 1990s, Dignity was still mostly, a local organization. We had a staff person who processed memberships and donations and all of that. But so much was going on in our church and in society that was repressive to the LGBTQ plus community. And so much of it was being justified by religion that we felt we really needed to be organized and to have a stronger voice. So we brought in some folks, we did an organization-wide study, and we wound up determining that we needed to do more than provide spiritual support to individuals. We really needed to strengthen our advocacy voice and to bring a pro-queer Catholic voice both into the church more loudly than we were already doing, although we already had quite a history of that, and I know we'll probably touch on some of that in a while. But to strengthen our capacity to do that. So we restructured the organization, we worked to get money to hire an executive director, strengthened it, and started taking a larger role, signing on to Supreme Court briefs that impacted LGBTQ people. The U.S. Catholic bishops were always fighting us. After abortion, suppressing gay equality was their second highest national legislative priority for 27 years. Now it's suppressing trans rights. So we had to develop a voice that was stronger to do that. And during the time that I was president, that was really our main goal, was to strengthen the organization and give our community a voice in the community of faith, in both within religious structures and within the public square.
Since 2007, you've been executive director of Dignity. What are your primary responsibilities and priorities today?
Continuing to give support to queer Catholic folks, to family members. I do a lot of work on policy things. Right now we are part of at least 14 lawsuits challenging the current administration's discriminatory policies. We've won 2 of them so far, although not all of the remedies have been enacted. And we're doing a lot of work within the global church as well. Since 2013, when Francis became Pope, there has been just a marked shift. Not everything that we want Catholic Church policies and dogma are still on paper the same, but there is much more visibility of the LGBTQ community, recognition of the needs of our families, all of that. We make it a point to have a presence at global Catholic events as Dignity and as members of the global queer Catholic community. And even within this whole global Catholic synod that is happening at the church, 2 leaders of Dignity, myself and one of our board members, were invited last October by Pope Leo and the head of the synod process to come to the Vatican to tell our stories of being married queer Catholics to over 1,000 delegates from all around the world. And And hopefully that is really going to keep opening the windows and lead to that change in doctrine that impacts our health care, that impacts our access to jobs, that impacts the education of queer and trans kids, that rips families apart if they think they have to choose between loving their kid and following what the church teaches. So we have a lot of work to do still.
Sal, you were elected to city council in 1982, took office in 1983, representing the Brooklyn neighborhood Bay Ridge. This is during the gay rights bill debate. Would you talk about Bay Ridge, the demographic background of your constituents?
Well, I had hair then, 40 years ago. But, yeah, my district was predominantly white ethnic, probably 90% white ethnic at the time, 10% others. Virtually all Catholic. We have 5 large parishes there. A huge number of police, fire, civil servants lived in the district, and there was a significant amount of opposition to Intro 2 at the time, very intense. And Cardinal O'Connor kind of targeted me at the time because he knew that, you know, my base of support was heavily against the bill, and you know, it caused a tremendous amount of grief. It was a very, very difficult period in my political life. It was the most intense period because of the hostility and the amount of antipathy towards Intro 2 at the time. The Daily News ran a front-page story with Cardinal O'Connor, no, Sal Albanese, yes, on Intro 2. And, you know, I got calls from Bishop McGovern at the time, Bishop McGovern was a lot more tolerant than Cardinal O'Connor. He actually called me and asked me to vote against the bill. And I told him I couldn't vote against the bill. He said, "God bless you, son," hung up. O'Connor was not very happy. You know, I ran into him a couple times after the bill passed, and he was less than warm, let's put it that way. So it was a pretty intense period. I had to basically cut all my phones. My office was closed for several days. My house was picketed. I had a bodyguard for 2 days. So it was pretty intense. I never thought I would survive it, but I couldn't vote against the bill. It was just, how could you vote against a bill that bans discrimination in housing and employment because of sexual orientation? It was against my conscience, and I also saw all the vitriol, all the hate that came out, and I knew that we had to pass this bill. The radio hosts were attacking us. We had people at the chamber. It was, we had Orthodox Jewish folks giving us the Heil Hitler sign. I mean, it was a zoo. It was incredibly intense. But I think that it definitely helped to open up the process where being gay was accepted in uniformed forces. It took time, it evolved, but the gay community did a great job organizing. They worked hard. Tom Cute, who you have on one of your slides, was an appendage of Cardinal O'Connor, so he blocked that bill for years until he left, and Peter Vallone came in as the speaker. He was against the bill, but he allowed it to come out of committee. So I know you asked me about demographics. I'm going on and on. Cut me off if I...
No. Well, just to follow up, what happened to the separation of church and state? You're receiving phone calls from church leaders lobbying you.
It certainly broke down during that period, that's for sure. It was, all the pastors were under pressure from O'Connor. O'Connor was he was heavily against this bill, and he really orchestrated the whole effort. And in my district, it all virtually being all Catholic, and he knew that the pressure would be helpful, and encouraged me to vote against the bill. It didn't work out for him. I voted for the bill, but it was a difficult period of time.
Ryan, in 2016, you coordinated the NYPD's response to Orlando following the Pulse nightclub massacre. Would you talk about your reaction and what this resource deployment entailed?
So that was, I would say there wasn't a community in the city that I didn't interact with in some way, both with Goal and as a counterterrorism analyst at the time. The chief of counterterrorism both knew my involvement in Goal, and also it happened to be that I was one of their active shooter analysts. And so I was sent out with members of Goal and with other members of the administration at the time from the police department to talk to bars, nightclubs, houses of worship from every faith background. And it struck me that for every queer business and organization we went to, there was an incredible openness to talking to police, because police were coming to them saying, how can we help you? This just happened. It's jarring. It's tragic. There are things that we have to help. There are things that we can do to prevent. There are things we will do to respond. What do you want to know? And I think from 2016 till about 2019 was one of the most incredible periods of talking to different facets of New York. I remember after Pulse, this will always stick with me, myself and a few other members of Goal went to the Islamic Cultural Center up in the Upper East Side, because the shooter in Orlando had claimed a number of affiliations to foreign terrorist organizations. It was unclear. Al-Qaeda, ISIS, there was a number of things at the time, and he'd been investigated for all of this. And the community across the city who identified as openly practicing Muslims suddenly felt eyes on them going, well, this was something that we need to make sure we talk to New York City's queer community. And they let Goal and the police department actually help bridge some of that and bring in resources from the center and bring in other service providers around the city to talk to them too. Because there was a realization that this is something that could actually happen to anybody, and this doesn't have, there's not one cultural or background divide here. It's something that everyone should be thinking about, and everyone should be talking to each other in New York City. And I will always remember going and speaking in front of the Islamic Cultural Center to hundreds of people who simply wanted to know, could they help also bring that message that they want to be a part of the conversation. They want to know what can be done to prevent this from happening too, and they wanted to know how they could reach out to the queer community. I thought it was unbelievable. And I focused less on the deployment of, say, the NYPD resources than on what was this community conversation that happened because of it. It was surprising. It was unexpected. And it gave a real window for officers to have conversations across the city and build relationships that seemingly just had been nascent and hadn't been happening for a little bit. I don't think we've ever in the police department forgotten Pulse, because we pay close attention to shootings like that and we continue to train and think about it. But I also know as Goal, we have never forgotten Pulse, because it was a moment where we got to demonstrate to everyone in the city that we were here for them, that the uniform was important, and that we were willing to make sure parts of the city that didn't talk to each other did. And I think that's what I take away from my involvement with Pulse at the time, and I think that's what we take away to a great deal. It's like good relationships, things that last to this, like right now, still, people we talk to because of that. Yeah, that was the part that I wanted to make sure, Stephen, when you had posited this with me, I brought out, because people don't see that part. That was incredibly important.
Marianne, in 2013, Pope Leo famously said, in response to a question about being gay, if a person is gay and willing to seek the Lord, then who am I to judge that person? It was a milestone, got attention worldwide, Some people indicated, well, this signals an openness to dialogue, to dissent in the Catholic Church, an emphasis on individual dignity and pastoral care over judgment. Others said, well, it's nice gesture affirming, but it's just rhetoric. Doctrine has not changed. How do you interpret that remark?
Both and. But I think what Francis and now Leo represent is a huge turn in some ways in Catholic leadership. And, you know, I hope we will also see it here in New York on the local level with a Leo appointed Archbishop Hicks, who's new to the job. Give him, you know, let's all pray for him. Give him some time. But I think hopefully we'll be very different from calling out the politicians and who are doing the right thing. You know, the Catholic Church under the two prior popes to Francis had been incredibly repressive. And it was a time of incredible damage and pain for queer people. You know, a lot of folks know in 1986 is also we're now marking the 40th anniversary of a letter to the bishops of the Catholic Church that condemned gay people in the most dehumanizing language that I think our church has ever used. And it came out as the community was also dealing with the worst of the ravages of AIDS. You know, so the community was already suffering, alienated, being let down by every institution in society. And then the Vatican had to pile on by calling us intrinsically disordered or objectively disordered and intrinsically evil, and we shouldn't be surprised if violence is the response to movements for equality, and on and on and on. And Dignity was targeted in that letter and was expelled from churches all over the country, Catholic churches where we had met, including from St. Francis Xavier, in a March of Exodus, or a Liturgy of Exodus that they did very famously here. So I think that when we saw someone who was open to dissent, wanting the church to accompany everybody and put the values of human rights together as a priority for the church, it did send some signals, and folks started to build on it. I know here in New York and all across the country, there are a lot more open LGBTQ ministries in Catholic Church, people of faith, scholars able to write queer theology and queer positive theology. So I think it gave us things to start building on. I think it also helped us bring to the fore the huge divide that exists between the people of the church, the laity, and many of the frontline ministers, and the hierarchy of the church, the bishops, the cardinals, the popes, and the right wing. But Catholic support for queer equality has been huge since the 1990s, if you talk to the people of the church. But at the same time, our church leaders are waging this war on our civil rights and on our health care and on our right to education and all of that. And we see that, you know, I think most people know over 40% of adults who were raised Catholic have left the church. And the issues of women's equality, gay equality, and the sexual abuse crisis are the three major reasons. So I think it says a lot about how faith is practiced in people's lives versus the power of the institution.
Thank you for that recognition. And it inspires me to play an oral history clip from one of our exhibits. I want to invite my colleague Soraya up to play one of our clips, or Andrew, I should say. I see him. A clip by former city council member Jimmy Van Bremer, who actually represented this very district, Long Island City, a 3-term openly gay council member, spoke about in the 70s and 80s growing up being gay and Catholic, and the anguish and the tension. And do you have it queued up, Andrew?
I definitely prayed and to God not to make me gay, right? Because it was like 13, 14 years old. I was like really at the cusp of like understanding exactly what that meant and what the future might hold, and then asking him not to make me gay. So it was a brutal, couple of years where, I liked being Catholic. I liked the faith. I liked the belonging. I liked the ceremonies. I liked a lot of that. But I also knew that these thoughts and these fantasies and these desires were inconsistent, to say the least, with that life and that religion that I was a part of. So it was really, really, really an awful time. And I would pray at night as I lay in bed, please don't make me gay. Please don't make me gay. Just don't make me gay. Like, why do I have to be gay?
It's a powerful, heartbreaking clip. Van Bramer himself, as I indicated, found a path to happiness and power, but many did not of his generation and other generations. Would you comment on that clip?
Yeah, I mean, it's so tragic that religion is seen as anti-gay. It's just not true. I mean, religion should be should be all expansive and recognize that who we are is always a gift from the God of love who creates us and brings us into being. And, now it's the trans kids, right, waking up saying, make my body right or take this away from me. And about a year and a half ago, we had a retreat with our young adult leaders. And they helped us to come up with a vision for the years ahead for Dignity. And it was that we are working for the day that no child feels alienated from their family, themselves, or their faith because of religion. We need to be part of ending religious trauma for the LGBTQ community and raise a generation free of that sense of condemnation. And I think that's a really important mission for so many of us to have.
Sal, you talked about your decision to vote for the gay rights bill in City Council in 1986. 40 years ago, it passed 21-14. You spoke about the opposition in your district in Bay Ridge. Would you tell us a little bit more? Where was this opposition coming from the Catholic Church, the fire, not just the phone calls, but from the fire department, the police department? Why such opposition and vitriol?
Well, I as I said, the Catholic Church was obviously against the bill. Cardinal O'Connor, who was very powerful at the time. But there's also, I mean, honestly, a lot of bigotry. I mean, a lot of folks just were. Some of the non-clergy folks were more vicious than some of the priests that I dealt with, it's unfortunate. That whole macho thing with in those days with fire and police and teachers going to be raping kids. All of those mythologies played a role, and it just drove people nuts. I knew there was opposition, but I didn't realize it was so powerful that people that I knew. I was going to church, walking up the aisle, and people are lobbying me to vote against the bill at St. Ephraim's Parish in Brooklyn, and getting calls at 4 a.m, getting threatened. I had a former fire commissioner, Commissioner by the name of O'Hagan, who was violently opposed to the bill. It was just out of pure bigotry. When he came up to my office, he wouldn't leave. We spent an hour. I told him there's no way I'm voting against the bill. So it's unfortunately, bigotry played a big role, and it continues to play a role in other areas in our society today. But I think passing the bill sent a signal that it started to lower the temperature. The uniformed forces became more open. Goal came about. So political leadership plays a huge role, but unfortunately, bigotry was incredibly powerful in generating that opposition and supercharged by the Catholic Church and even some of the Jewish communities. As I said, plenty of Orthodox Jews were at the hearings and really were violently opposed to the bill.
That's right. It was a two-step process to pass the gay rights bill. I think as President Adams mentioned, it was introduced in City Council in January 1971. So it was first in the General Welfare Committee, and it has to pass out of the General Welfare Committee. And that was difficult because the majority leader of City Council was Tom Cute, who was anti-gay, closely tied to the Catholic Church, and he appointed anti-gay people to the General Welfare Committee. Consequently, it languished in committee. One time it didn't was 1974. It got out of the committee. Expectations were very high that the gay rights bill would pass in 1974. Typically, if a bill gets out of committee, that means it's going to get a full floor vote and pass. Well, at this point, the Catholic Church, the fire department, the police department, consolidated forces launched a massive publicity campaign against the gay rights bill. The fire department, our firemen work together, eat together, sleep together. It would be divisive to have a gay firefighter. The police department having a gay police officer would undermine morale. The Catholic Church, this is a menace to family life. So subsequently, it didn't get out of the General Welfare Committee for 12 more years. Really a tremendous struggle. And talking about police opposition, Ryan, in 2019, NYPD Commissioner James O'Neill, in June, as the 50th anniversary of the Stonewall Uprising was approaching, issued a formal apology for the violent police raid at the Stonewall Inn in June 1969. Some applauded the apology, including the gay speaker of the city council, Corey Johnson. Others said it was inadequate. Richard Sands, attorney for Lambda Legal, a national organization, said the criminalization of LGBTQ people by the police continues to this day. How would you respond to Commissioner O'Neill's apology and to the criticism by attorney Richard Sands?
To the commissioner, I said then and I say now thank you, because that was a moment of humility on the part of an institution like the New York City Police Department, recognizing it had, in doing what it did, done something wrong. And he was more than happy to do it. He was, in fact, driven to believe it was the right thing, and he wanted to do the right thing. And I know so much work had gone on since 1969 to that moment in so many different parts of the city, across the community, not just policing, I mean, just across the community to try and figure out what is it to be queer and also what is it to have police. And I think Jimmy O'Neill recognized we were at a moment where the police department could be proud to say we did the wrong thing, and it could have a meaningful impact on what it meant to be a New Yorker and to be queer and to look at the police and say, oh, there's openness here. There's acceptance. There's a recognition of this. I think it's part of a long healing process still. And he was ready, willing, and did it. And that was wonderful. To Richard Sands, I mean, I think this is two separate issues. I think don't conflate what is an incredibly meaningful moment from an institution steeped in this history to say something like, I'm sorry, we were wrong, we shouldn't have done this, with the larger issues around is being queer still being criminalized and still being politicized. But like in terms of Richard and Lambda Legal, we always need to listen, because Lambda Legal is still one of the most important organizations for the movement generally. and because so many of the rights that both the police protect and that everyone needs has been fought through courts. It has been fought through the work that Lambd has done. So hearing that, I think of it as a completely different thing, but I think of it as one that we have to have as part of our conversation as queer members of law enforcement, and that we need to have with the community too.
Let me follow up, Ryan, with respect to GOAL. GOAL was established, as I mentioned, in 1982 by Sergeant Charlie Cochran and others. Cochran in 1981 testified for gay rights at New York City Council at a public hearing, and it was dramatic. It was a momentous occasion. They had these public hearings at the General Welfare Committee, and typically a member of the PBA testified against the gay rights bill. In this case, it was Pat Burns, who remarked in 1981, well, I know of no gay police officers. The next person to step up was Charlie Cochran, and the crowd thought, oh, wait, you can't have two police officers testify in a row against the gay rights bill. And dramatically, he said something to the effect, my name is Charlie Cochran, and he listed his citations, paused, and I'm proud to be a member of the New York City Police Department, pause. I'm equally proud to be a gay man, and the crowd erupted into cheers. It was a tremendous moment. And fast forward to the mid-1990s, you alluded to Fran de Benedictis, and Edgar Rodriguez filed a lawsuit against NYPD because of the unequal treatment of GOAL in comparison to other fraternal organizations. The lawsuit was eventually settled, and in 1996, for the first time, GOAL marched in the New York City Pride Parade in full dress uniform. That continued until 2021. In 2021, GOAL was banned from marching in the Pride Parade by parade organizers Heritage of Pride. This is in conjunction with the rise of Black Lives Matter. Critics argued that the police presence in the parade had a triggering effect and instituted a 5-year ban. In 2025, parade organizers said, well, you can march again as long as you don't have your sidearm. GOAL President Brian Downey said, this is unacceptable, it's part of the uniform. How would you respond?
Fran's laughing already, Stephen. Before you finish that.
How would you respond to the ban of GOAL from the New York City Pride Parade?
Let them march in uniform. And that includes what comes with wearing a uniform in the patrol guide. Also, there's something that Commissioner Tisch had great pleasure pointing out last year to Heritage of Pride, which is, you have hundreds of cops walking down the route. If something happens, wouldn't you want them to, respond? You can't ask officers to march in half uniform or in partial uniform. And this last minute thing that happened right before Pride, which wasn't a real offer, was, okay, you guys can put your uniform back on again, but, no sidearm. Thanks so much. We waited 3 months and negotiated with you and, quite frankly, begged to let us show again that the community supports the police and will welcome the police. And you had a little thing that you actually knew would mean they couldn't march in full uniform. And that was not great. They should be marching in full dress uniform, and knock on wood, Heritage of Pride is going to make the right decision this year.
Marianne, we were talking yesterday on the phone about tension between gay activists and the church in the 1980s during the era of Cardinal O'Connor. We spoke about the famous ACT UP action of December 1989 at St. Patrick's Cathedral when ACT UP members disrupted Mass by Cardinal O'Connor. Dozens were arrested in opposition of O'Connor's stance on teaching safe-sex education in public schools during the AIDS crisis, in opposition to O'Connor's stance on condom distribution to curb the spread of AIDS. This action made the news internationally, it was a major moment. How would you interpret and how do you regard the ACT UP Stop the Church action of 1989?
Yes, applaud. Yeah. You know, one of the worst powers that church hierarchs have used against the LGBTQ community and against our families is to try and make us invisible. And Cardinal O'Connor had refused overtures from the queer community to discuss AIDS, to talk about how Catholic services could be better, to be more pastoral, to serve folks better, whether it was hospitals or funeral homes or, you know, whatever, and refused, just didn't open the door. So folks like the Cathedral Project and ACT UP went into the churches because that was the only way to get attention to the fact that people were dying and that people were being pushed even further to the side, denied care, denied support. Their families were being demonized as well and denied pastoral support. So I think, you know, for many folks, the protest took the form of standing in the cathedral and turning their backs to Cardinal O'Connor. And I think most folks found that form of protest acceptable. But when it got louder, when there was still no response, and someone took a communion host and threw it to the floor and stepped on it, you know, it caused a national and even an international furor. Yes, it was a sign of disrespect, but it was a way to call attention to the fact that God's people were being killed by this awful disease, and the church and society and our politicians and the medical community was not treating them because they were gay men, because they were Haitian folks, because they were immigrants, because they were poor people, because they were black, for all of those reasons. And I think that it helped to shift some of the conversation about what is the greater wrong here. You know, what is the greater sin? So I think they were so brave and so daring, and I hope we never have to make those kinds of choices again. But God bless them for doing it.
Sal, I want to give you the last word before we turn it over to audience Q&A. From your perspective as a former elected official in the New York City Council, a former mayoral candidate, we're talking tonight again about the evolution, attitudes in these three powerful institutions, the NYPD, FDNY, and the Catholic Church. From your vantage point, would you talk about this evolution and what you've noticed, what you've observed with respect to LGBTQ matters?
Obviously, it's night and day. I mean, things have changed for the better. I mean, we had a fire commissioner who was a lesbian appointed. I think that passing the legislation was very helpful. Mayor Koch at the time was extremely popular, so he was also helpful. And uniformed forces, you know, they're savvy, they're political as well, right? I mean, you know that better than anyone. And so they, you know, commissioners became much more responsive. They were not allowing any of the, you know, nonsense that went on in the past where people were being penalized for being gay. The business community became much more receptive. So I you know, we're not there yet. There's still a lot of folks that have that unfortunate bias, but they don't exhibit it anymore. It's not acceptable anymore, and that was done through political leadership. Played a huge role. That's why that intro too was so important. Its passage made a huge difference, and I mean, and Lambda, the gay community, played a huge role. They were very effective in organizing. So things have changed for the better. The evolution has been in that area certainly much more positive.
Thank you, panelists.